Welcome to the New Calculus channel. My name is John Gabriel. In the previous video on Academic Ignorance and Stupidity, I talked about Weierstrass's definition of continuity and how the mainstream took that definition, manipulated and changed it into the definition for a limit from which they derived their derivative definition. And so, first of all, if you recall correctly, in the previous YouTube video on Academic Ignorance and Stupidity, I showed you that continuity is defined by actually reducing the distance, this xy distance, not xy distance, the distance between the green point and the point that is under consideration, such that it's less than a given delta that you see over here. We always take the minimum of these two deltas, and also less than the given epsilon, which is stated here on the left hand side. And of course, if it's continuous, then that must be true and the function must be defined at this red spot. Now, as I said in the earlier presentation, there is no function where, if it happens to be continuous, that it's not defined at that particular point. There is no such function. Of course, mainstream academic morons can actually make a function undefined at that point. And how did they do it? Well, I showed you in the last episode that if f of x is any particular function, then to make it undefined at any particular x, you just multiply it by 1 as follows. So x minus k over x minus k will make f of x supposedly undefined at x is equal to k. Okay. Now, of course, that's absolute hogwash, because it's like saying this. It's like saying 3/4 is not really the same as 9/12, right? But in effect, we can get from 9/12 to 3/4 by simply subtracting values or multiplying the numerator and the denominator by a third. And that's the same as multiplying it by 1, isn't it? Of course. So the mainstreamers came up with this little trick here in the big deception to show you that you can actually have a hole at a particular function, but there is not a single function in which you can come along and tell me that the function is not defined at the point under consideration if it is continuous. So, or if it has a limit. I'm sorry, if it has a limit at that point, then you cannot tell me that it's not defined at that point. It is defined at that point unless you've done something terribly stupid, like I've shown you in this slide here. In other words, you've multiplied it by 1 and then you've introduced a little condition saying that this cannot be equal to k. Well, would you, in your right mind, multiply that by 0 over 0? Of course not. So naturally, when you divide by x minus k over x minus k, you get back to the irreducible form, which is f of x. Okay, so there is no contradiction here, but mainstream idiots have used this little trick here to confuse, to obfuscate matters, and to try and tell students that the calculus was made rigorous. The mainstream calculus was never made rigorous. There wasn't a rigorous calculus before my new calculus. It just simply didn't exist. The new calculus is the first and only rigorous formulation of calculus in human history. You don't have this sort of problem in the new calculus. You don't have a difference quotient as you do here. Let me rewrite that. Let's get rid of that. Oh dear. Okay, you don't have a difference quotient like this, where you have to introduce a condition such that h cannot be 0. In other words, according to the epsilonics definition, this particular definition here, you don't have to introduce that. there is no need for nonsense like this. You don't even need epsilonics. You don't need to prove that a limit exists. There is no function, as I said in the previous video, that exists such that L is not equal to f of c. L is equal to f of c. And if a limit exists, then it is continuous at f of c, and you cannot go ahead and say, oh, x minus c over x minus c multiplied by this function changes it into a different function. It doesn't change it into a different function any more than multiplying 3/4 by 3/3 would change it into a different fraction. 3/4 is equal to 9/12. Okay, so in the big deception, in order to make themselves look good and pretend that they've rigorized calculus, mainstream morons have come up with all these tricks and false ideas, and they have the gall to turn around and say that my new calculus is not rigorous. Well, I challenge anyone to show me a flaw in my new calculus. I challenge anyone, doesn't matter whoever it is. And if you are able to, go to my question and answer page on the Google sites and post the challenge there. Show me where you think my new calculus is wrong, and I'll show you that you are wrong and that there is something wrong with your brain rather than mine. My tolerance and my patience for mainstream academics has run out. I do not respect any of them, and I have nothing but loathing and contempt for most of mainstream academics. So I'm going to keep exposing their ignorance and stupidity, because it is in the interests of the future mathematicians and those who are aspiring to be mathematicians, and students who will be studying the topic of calculus. I am on your side. I'm not on the side of the big stupid which is really the academic electorate, and the fools who sit and cast judgment and decide which knowledge they prefer over other knowledge, introducing their own biases, their own ignorance, incompetence, and stupidity. Well, that's all I really wanted to show you in this episode. This particular applet is one that I use in my classes when I teach these ridiculous concepts. And as you can see, the finite difference here in the case of Newton's kludge or Cauchy's kludge turns out to be pretty problematic, because when you get when you get to the same point, you get 0 over 0. So can you see, that is a reason why we need to have delta greater than 0. This particular value here, 0.54, must be greater than 0. Okay, so if you get to that point there, they'd have a problem. And the reason this is so is that the derivative, this here, is defined in terms of limit. The biggest laugh, however, is that in order to prove the limit L exists, you need to know the limit L, and that's the funniest part of it. It's just incredibly hilarious to see such stupidity still being taught in lecture rooms and classrooms worldwide. I'm hoping to put an end to that. Well, this has been a presentation on the New Calculus channel. My name is John Gabriel. Till next time, goodbye.